All right, so now that we've got our guy back into Maya from ZBrush with our normal maps and stuff, there's a variety of next steps that we could take. We could go straight into texturing them and setting up shaders. We could go straight into rigging and do animation tests. Um, but the first thing I decided to do, just because it's a very sort of quick process, meaning that texturing and shaders can take a while, rigging and animation is going to take a few hours as well. While just doing an integration test for this guy, just showing him plopped into some sort of background, can be relatively quick. And so for that, it's often a good idea just to show the creature you're working on in context. Because yeah, I can go and to go and create a 3D environment for this guy. It would obviously be really time consuming. So just going and shooting like a photograph or shooting some video of a location and sticking the character in it is useful just to allow people to understand the scale of the character and just what he looks like in a real location. And so the what you shoot obviously is not necessarily going to be something that's final. So if you were working on a movie, it's not an actual plate from the movie. It's just something you go out in the parking lot and shoot something. But even for our personal work, it's still something that's a useful thing to do. So that's the next thing that I decided to do for this guy. I didn't actually record myself setting that up, so we're going to just sort of take a look at some of the steps. So the first thing that I did is decided just to shoot something in my living room just because it was handy. And so let me just go and find that. And so inside here. So I have a new directory in my project now called footage, which is where, if I go inside here, I have a numbered sequence, but if I go in here, this is just a folder from my digital camera. So I have a 5D Mark II, so it's a digital SLR that also shoots video. And so with that, we can see that I shot some pictures, just trying to figure out a general composition. And then I also shot a chrome ball just to be able to make an HDR that I could use for lighting reference for that location. And then a QuickTime movie. And so here I have a camera on a tripod. So it's a locked off shot, meaning it's not a moving camera. So I don't have to deal with camera tracking. That would obviously slow things down a little bit. So just having, if we go and take a look at these pictures. And so I decided to stick a soft box, a big light off to the right, just to get the light to be a little bit stronger in here. And then just decided to rearrange my furniture a little bit just because I wanted to have the dude sort of inside there. And then by moving the furniture, we can get him to go down those stairs potentially. And so once I had decided inside here the positioning of objects, so you can see like these two things that are on the ground, I sort of move them around. And once I decided, okay, that's pretty much it, I then went and shot the video. And then after I shot the video and decided the video was okay, I then shot this dude. And so just a simple C stand with a little, chrome ball on top of it. And then, so for the pictures of the chrome ball, I just got a little bit closer to it and then just shot a bunch of exposures from underexposed to overexposed. And then I can go and take those pictures into Photoshop and then just crop right to the edges of the sphere. And then I can use merge to HDR in Photoshop to just go and create an HDR file that I can then use for lighting in Maya. The video that I shot is in here as well, which is one of these. I think it's this one. And so if we open that, the camera that I have shoots at 1080p, so meaning 1920 by 1080 progressive. So it's not interlaced, it's square pixels, which is great. It's a really, really cool camera, makes life a lot easier. So again, the camera's on a tripod. So if I hit play, let's turn off the volume. Basically, locked off shot. So the only thing that tells us that it's not a still is the water bubbling in the aquarium there. So, which isn't very much, but it's enough. So If I had somebody else around, I probably would have had somebody maybe like sitting on the couch reading or somebody in the kitchen doing something, just so again we know that it's video. But based on the time I had, this was going to be good enough. So also, since it's just a locked off camera, it's going to make it pretty easy for me to align my camera in Maya. And since I have right angles in here, so from the stair to the floor or right here to the floor, that also makes life a little bit easier for aligning my camera. And it's something I'm going to do. I'm going to sort of do by eye. I'm not going to be very anal about making sure that it's completely perfect. It's pretty quick to do it by eye if you're not trying to be anal. If you're trying to be anal, it gets a little more time consuming. So anyway, so I have this QuickTime movie, copied it from the camera to the computer. Also, the cool thing with using my SLR as a video camera is that it just shoots the video onto compact flash cards. So I don't have to digitize video and stuff. I can just take the card from the camera, put it in the computer, copy the QuickTime movie over. It captures the videos as QuickTime movies. So really, from a speed perspective, that's what I really love about the 5D. And the new 7D, which came out, is a little cheaper and also shoots video. It shoots 720p at 60 frames per second and 1080p at 30 frames per second. So pretty cool. So anyway, very, very simple. Could have been a still, but I made it video just so we have something moving in there. And so I then had to take this QuickTime movie and convert it to numbered frames so I could import it into Maya. So if we go out here, that's what this is. And so I took the QuickTime into After Effects and then just exported it as a numbered Targa sequence. So there you go. And I didn't use the entire length of the clip that I shot. I only used 300 frames of it. That's 10 seconds if I'm working at 30 frames per second. And that's more than enough for an animation test. So if we, were to open one of these guys, so let's just open that with F-check. There's the video. And here's also the video after I brought it into After Effects. You can see it's also color corrected. So, so that it looks a little bit nicer. And then this is a sequence. So if I open animation, so it's loading slowly because I'm loading this over a network right now. So, but either way, if I just pause, we can see those little bubbles moving. So anyway, it is a video sequence. And although I think what I'm going to do is copy these locally because that's a little slow. So let me just pause for a sec. Okay, so I just copied the footage locally just so that it loads faster. But we can see inside here anyway. So numbered sequence, numbered targas, ready to bring into Maya. Now, since it's a locked camera also, as far as aligning the camera, I don't necessarily have to align it to the whole sequence. I'm just aligning it to one frame. So there's no camera tracking or match moving going on. And then as far as the HDR is concerned, these guys, we can see if I go into in my source images directory, I have a directory called HDR, which is where I created my HDR file, which is right there. And so that's just a 32-bit file. And for creating that, I can show that real quick. Let me just launch Photoshop. And here it's just a matter of opening. Actually, don't really need to open. Just go to Automate in Photoshop, Merge to HDR. And then you can go and find your files, which are in footage. And oops, didn't want to do that. Okay, look at the thumbnails. And with these, I don't need to merge this many. I can just take like every third one. Like that. Because, that's just more information than necessary. So I'm just grabbing, in the order that I want them to be. So from dark to light, hit OK. And we can see that those files are in there. And then basically we can go and hit OK. So it's loading them. And once they're all loaded, it's going to merge them eventually. And so just going to give it a few seconds. Okay, so then this window pops up. We can see in here how it was able to tell the relative brightness as it's trying to figure out the exposure. And then here's the merged result. And so I can go in and say, yeah, 32-bit, fine, hit OK. Now it'll create the file. And now we have an HDR file. So you can see it's a 32-bit file. And so, but now I can just go in and crop the region that I need. So we can get a little bit closer to that. But if I go to, let's say, adjust on this guy, and I can adjust exposure. So you can see in the end that it is an HDR. So you can see the light information that's in there. So as far as cropping it for Maya, so you just want to, crop to the edges of the sphere. It's easier to crop after you merge them. And then there we go. And then if I go on image size, probably not a perfect square, 628 by 3. So I want it to be a square. So I just have to see where do I have too many. And then I'll just go to canvas size, figure out where I need to shave off on the height, off the top, off the bottom, probably the bottom, or make it equal, 628. So now hit OK. And now it's a perfect sphere. And then, there you go. So now this isn't super high res, obviously. You can see this is at 100%. If I wanted my HDR to be more high res, I would have gotten my camera a lot closer to it than I did in the picture, but it doesn't really matter. It's just general lighting that is going to be soft. I'm not doing like sharp reflections. If I was going to do a very, very shiny render of the character, let's say he was chrome in the environment, I might want a higher res HDR to create nice reflections, but I wasn't caring about that. So anyway, so I have the HDR, save it out, there you go. So now in Maya, let's make a new scene. And then all I would need to do is, make a camera. This is going to be my shot cam. And then for this camera in my render globals, I have to set it to the size of my footage. And the footage, even though it was shot in full HD, and so meaning my footage on my camera was shot 1920 by 1080, I rendered it out of After Effects a little smaller at 1280 by 720, so 720p. And so that's really big enough for most things. Obviously not for, let's say, a final shot or film, but for most things that you're going to be doing for yourself or design process or development, this is more than big enough. And the nice thing is the footage from my camera, 1920 by 1080, then squeezed down to this size, gets a little sharper and tighter, looks better. So this is the size. And so then I just need to go and say, turn on a resolution gate for my shot cam. And then for my shot camera, go to the camera attribute editor. And the lens that I used was a 35 millimeter prime lens, so meaning that it's not variable. So I know I used a 35 millimeter lens. I know that the film aspect ratio is 1.77 for what I did. But then as far as the film gate and camera aperture, I can go in with these and sort of find out the size of the CCD in my camera to enter accurate numbers in here. But in the end, for something where I'm just blocking something in, I don't mind eyeballing it. So now I have to go and import my image plane. So I just go into footage and grab the first frame of the sequence. There it is. And then let me just go to my camera attribute editor and go under display overscan, just so I'm a little closer to the footage. And then basically I just need to go and align my grid so that it looks like it's on the floor in there. And then I can create a plane and use the plane instead, hide the grid, Because then with the plane, I can see as I move it if it seems like it's moving correctly. And so, for example, inside here, as I move this around, there are actually lines on the floor. So something that would have made my life easier would be like if I put like a square piece of plywood on the floor that was a perfect square, I could just align my grid to that to make sure the perspective distortion is correct. But I do have these lines on the floor. So if I go in here, I can see, try and see that, yes, it's going along the stair there, but the perspective distortion isn't completely correct. You can see once we get to there. So I can go to my camera, and try and using one of these presets, but it's not necessarily going to go and match my digital camera. I'd just kind of be guessing. And so at this point, I could, try and do a couple of things. I can just go and adjust the focal length. Because again, right now we're just eyeballing it. So like, let's say I put that to 30, and then I go and align that to the floor inside there. Then as I sort of move things around, the issue is like, well, if I align it like that, so it's aligned to one of the floors on the ground there and the ground there, then as I move it, I can start to, see like, well, seems like there's too much distortion. Let's make the lens longer instead of shorter. So now let's make it 40. And so try and look at the lines on the floor and see if I can get that to line up there. And now we can see we're sort of getting a little bit closer. So we can see that this edge is lining up with the line on the floor there, and then the line on the floor there. That edge is lining up. So this is totally like not accurate in the sense it's not perfect, but it's definitely good enough just to have the character, standing there casting a shadow on the ground. Because I can then go in and take this and scale it. So it's a little bigger. And then scoot it this way. I'm just trying to align where the wall probably is there. Then I can go and grab those edges right there and scoot those, let's say, to that point. And then I can go and grab those edges and move those up. And move it this way. Move it that way. Move it that way. Move it that way. And that way. And up. So I'm totally doing it fast and not trying to be anal. So just extruding edges. So now I have that. And then here, for this guy, scoot that up to there. And then this guy, I need to go back that way. And then if I want, I could do, that's fine like that. Anyway, you get the point. So you're just modeling on top of the photo, because I need to do that because then I need my dude to cast a shadow into the backplate. And that's simple enough, because then I can just take this ground plane and put a use background shader on it. So if I go to hypershade and then make a use background shader and assign it on the floor, and then I can go and create a sphere in my scene. And then go and create a light. We'll just use a directional light for a sec. And let's turn on cast shadows for it. So I'm just making them a little softer. Okay. So if I now were to render, and let me just go to my render globals and say we want to render with mental ray, and let's just make the render cleaner. and then render our shot cam. And there you go. So there is our sphere casting a shadow on the ground. And then the object that I have on the ground there, I need that to go to the attribute editor for it. I need it to receive shadows from that sphere, but it doesn't need to cast any shadows. It's not casting shadows on anything. There you go. So now we just have the sphere. So the next thing to do would be to match the lighting that's in the scene. And so that's why I have that HDR. But the HDR is something that I can use sort of like as a general fill. But then I'd also want to create or replicate the actual light that I have inside here. The ambient lighting in the room, like the ceiling lights, like we can see some back there, are relatively dim compared to this bright light that I put to the right. So that's the main light that needs to be matched inside the scene. And so if I go back to my perspective window, then I should have shot another photo of what we have to the side. But basically, from our photo, there's a staircase right here of just like this one, short, like 3 steps. And then I have a light right there. And so for that light, I just create an area light. Because the light that I used was a softbox, meaning it was a big light like this. And it was up in the air and angled this way. So this is basically, in the end, just information that I know because I shot the plate. So if you didn't shoot the plate, but you had a picture of a chrome ball, you could look in the chrome ball, and the chrome ball's reflections will allow you to look into those and see what the lights were in the scene. So, right, because if I go inside here and open one of these pictures, one of the ones that's not too blown out, right, you can see the light. So you can see we have our ceiling lights, and then much brighter than that is this softbox you can see up some stairs. So when you don't have, a lot of information about a set, if you do have a picture of a chrome ball, all of your lighting information is right in there. But in here, this is roughly where the light is, not perfect. And then so I can get rid of that directional light, go to the area light, turn on shadows for that, and then just increase the shadow rays. If the shadow rays are too low, you get really grainy shadows. So now if I go to the shot cam and re-render this area, now it's going to be lit by the area light. So you can see that now I'm getting much softer shadows. The shadow is going to be too dark compared to other shadows because there is other light in the scene, but you'd want to render the shadows separately and composite them later so you can adjust their opacity. And then if this sphere needed to cast a shadow on top of that round thing right there, I would need to go and model that, right? So I'd have to go and create something that kind of matches that object. And I can totally be rough about it. And looking at the photo, this thing's much closer to the stairs. So let's go back to the shot cam so that I can align that. So that means it needs to be bigger and down. So that's more accurate as far as the placement. And then that guy is going to get the use background shader. And then that guy, again, can receive shadows. Doesn't need to cast them for what I'm doing. So now, if I were to move this guy, let's say, there, we can see it's now casting a shadow on that guy. And I'd have to go and model all the other stuff and, but you get the idea. So then as far as bringing the HDR inside here, if I were to, let's say, create a reflective shader for that guy, so a blend, I can then go into render globals, go to indirect lighting, image-based lighting, create, and go and grab the HDR, which is going to be angular for the type of HDR that I made. And now that's in here. So if I now go and do that, we can see that it's now reflecting that HDR. And so at this point, obviously, on my use background shader, it's set to be reflective. Let me get rid of history. So I'm just going to turn off reflectivity on the use background shader. All right, so now you can see the HDR being reflected in the chrome bulb. So, and then as far as the geometry I modeled, I don't necessarily want that to be visible in reflections unless I project the camera. All this stuff, like we really just don't have time to get into. I just want to give you a quick overview of like how fast integrating this stuff can go. So anyway, that's basically my setup. So I had, you know, an area light and an HDR, and I modeled the living room. And you can see that it goes relatively quick. So unfortunately, I didn't record myself doing it. So I think I just sort of started it as a test and I don't know, just forgot to hit record. So anyway, I can open that scene. And so let's just go over here. So here you can see, let's go and get the channel box to be a little smaller. I just imported the character that we set up earlier from ZBrush with the normal map. So again, you can see I have my high res layer, my low res one. Oh, this is the one with the rig that we haven't gotten to rigging yet. So let's not look at that one. Bum, 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 bum. There we go. So this is pre-rigging, so more where we're at right now. And we can see for this that what I had modeled. But you can see that this is all really, really simple stuff. You saw how quickly I did the floor in front of you. So modeling this stuff, you know, no big deal. And then with this guy, then I can go and take, you know, the low res dude. And the nice thing is now I can sort of move him around my little environment inside here. And so it's something that is useful because now it allows us to judge the scale of the character in a real location. But instead of modeling a whole set, you know, I can go in and all these files got more organized later on. So now I'm just, let me get rid of some stuff here. I'm just hiding that location. Yeah. So let's hide that too. Just go back to our dude. Okay. So the point is that now it's easy to judge for this guy, knowing that, you know, in my living room, this is 7 feet tall right here. And so I can now use this as a guide to decide, for example, in the development process, how tall is this character or creature supposed to be? We may have been assuming all along that it was, you know, 5 feet tall or 7 feet tall, but in the end, now we can basically look at it and decide, okay, actually, these are reference spheres, like the one I made earlier that I showed you. These are the spheres I made when I was just testing the lighting in the scene. Okay. So yeah, like I was saying, for our dude, so now if I move him inside here, right, so I can look where his head is. I know that's 7 feet right there. So that means now he's about 6'5", something like that. And then we can make a decision if that's what we like. You know, maybe we want him to be tiny. Maybe we want him to be this little dude hopping around. Or we want him to be exactly 7 feet. Or we want him to be 8 feet. And then we have, you know, lots of issues that'll pose because for him to walk around a normal house, if he is supposed to be some sort of alien pet thing, means he's going to be ducking his head all the time. So hopefully you can see how incredibly valuable it is to have an environment for your character. And sure, you could go and model, you know, a nice environment, but that's really time consuming. You can see that this is incredibly simple modeling. It takes really very, very little time to do. You know, we're talking about, you know, in under an hour, you can have your character comped into a background. And if it's a locked off plate, it can even be video. Um, but it's definitely very, very helpful just to be able to judge things like scale. So going and comping the character into a plate is something that is a very common thing to do. It's very useful as reference to sort of inform the design process. And so the next thing that I did with this guy is I just took the shader we had already made, just the blend with the normal maps, and just did some render tests, just tuning the brightness of the area light in the scene, um, so that we could, or I could render him out in the plate. And so this is just a regular blend shader. And so the only tweak I made to the shader, did I make it in this one? Yeah, is I didn't want to go through the effort at this point of setting up a subsurface shader. Like this creature later on is going to need something like that to look more realistic once we get to texturing and shaders. But for now, I can simply go to the mental ray folder on my blend and just turn on scattering. It's kind of like a cheap subsurface scattering built into the blend. It is mental ray based, so it doesn't look nearly as good as the fast skin shader does, but it just gives you a little bit of that appearance of translucency. So I just turned that on. And then for the color, I kind of had it match the color or ambient color in the room just to help integrate him a little bit better. And so let's go and take a look at some of those stills. Let's see, living room. No, it's not that one. Oh, do I not have it on this computer? Oh. All right, let's render some. So I think this is probably the correct scene for that. So let's go and get that stuff in there. And let's do a render. So let me just go in and make sure we're rendering the right camera. In this scene, it's persp. In my later scene for this guy, I called it shot cam. So if this is my persp, then let's go perspective and render that. Okay, so this just finished rendering. So we can see there's the guy, and so he's got his shadows. And so it's nothing, so we save that, nothing fancy, right? But you can see it's definitely still helpful. Later on, once I rigged the character and wanted to do rigged pose tests inside this environment, I started tuning the lighting in here a little bit better with him because he's a little dark in there, and there are ceiling lights in the dining room. And so I ended up adding some of those later on. But for now, you can see it gets the point across. So let's go and do another render. So let's see. We can see, by the way, there's animation in here. I just don't have the rendering of it. That's on my computer at home. So basically, I then took the group node for this guy, and I simply keyframed it moving around because the character's not rigged yet. And then I rendered out this animation. And so this is something that then looks like I accidentally put another key in there, that key. I just hit S by accident. Okay, there we go. So I animated the group node for the character geometry, just moving inside, rotating around. And so once he's rigged, I can animate him, actually animate him inside the living room, which is the intention. But for now, this just allows me to render out this animation and then show somebody, here's him in an environment. Gives us an idea of scale, gives us an idea of, just what he feels like in a natural environment. So it's not rigged and animated. It doesn't have textures and shaders, but it's still very useful information to provide somebody to understand the design. So let's go and do another render. Okay, so we can see obviously as he enters the room, so he gets hit by that bright light that we have coming from the right, and it works pretty well. So this is something that, again, it's just a blend, nothing fancy. It's just a single area light in the scene and an HDR, so that's also really, really simple. So in this scene, there's still a couple things to resolve with the shadow catching objects. There's a little funny thing there. Um, I've got the shadow getting cast on the aquarium, which needs to get fixed because that's a self-illuminating object, so you wouldn't get the shadow so dark on it. So things like that, but those are things that nobody's going to notice, right? For what we're using this for, which is just to say, hey, here's what the dude looks like in an environment. This is enough. People are just going to look here. They're not going to sit and analyze if everything's perfect as far as integrating him into the scene, because this isn't the final shot, right? It's just, here's the idea. And by not having the textures and shaders, it also helps us to just focus on the form of the character and not get, not concentrate on more than one thing at a time. At this point, the only thing we're concentrating is really not the quality of the integration or materials. We're really just being like, here's the guy in a scene. This is how big it is. Do we like the scale of him? Do we like how he works in an environment? So, the lighting is relatively close. He's integrating okay. But it definitely serves its purpose. And so we can always just do one more render. So just rendering the last frame of that sequence. I'm not going to render the whole animation out because, like I said, I've done that already, and that's on a different machine. But you can get the idea, I think, of what the animation would look like. It's just going to be him floating inside there. All right. So now we can just be able to analyze him from a couple different points of view. Here again, that shadow's way too dark, right? But that's just because it, is just casting the black shadow from the area light and plopping it on top of the background. So again, you render for final shots and stuff, you render the stuff separately and tune it. For this, it's really not a big deal. We're just sort of focusing on the guy. All right. So once I have a series of these stills of the guy in an environment or a movie, a quick time of him moving through, I can then show that to somebody or just provide that to somebody as reference, just like, here's what he looks like. Because this only, takes, it doesn't have to take that long. I probably spent, to get to this point for the scene, maybe an hour, maybe an hour and a half. And so in a short period of time, I have something to send off to somebody before I move on to rigging. Because the thing we really want to see is this guy posed in the scene, so that we can sort of get an idea, not just for what his scale is, but the big next step is seeing what is he capable of. And so, which is another critical part of the development process, which is obviously rigging so we can animate him, but rigging also just so we can do posing. What are the key poses for this character? What does he look like when he's standing or resting or attacking or jumping or crouching or whatever? Because the design in and of itself, and its neutral pose that it was modeled in, we haven't quite experimented with what he's capable of. What does he really look like when he's resting on these little spike things? What does he look like? Can he stand on this back thing by itself and balance on that? So now, to get to the next phase of development, we have to rig him. And so I do this thing real quick just so I can send it off and say, here's this. Now I'm going to move on to rigging. So at least, somebody's going to have something to look at while I can then move on and spend a day rigging the character. And so we're going to now move on to that. And then for rigging, the rigging also isn't going to be, we're going to see something that's 100% perfect. I'm not going to deal with any sort of muscle systems or blend shape deformers that fix the bulging in areas or flexors or stuff like that. We're just going to do a quick rig. And so the rig for this character was probably maybe somewhere around 5 or 6 hours to rig the character, meaning making a skeleton, skinning it, and creating IK controls so that we can pose them. And so that's what we're going to move on to next. So here we just saw doing a quick integration test for our dude to judge scale and size. And now let's rig them.